Back in Alabasta, Luffy suffered his first real defeat at the hands of Crocodile, but what really decided the fight wasn't just strength, it was how Crocodile used his devil fruit. He didn't just have a strong ability, but Crocodile had actually mastered it, using his devil fruit in ways Luffy had never seen before. Crocodile revealed that this was something he had achieved through sheer training. Unlike the fools content with just eating their fruit, he had wanted to unlock all of his fruit's potential. At the time, this may have seemed like just another villain hyping themselves up, but it turns out, this might have been one of the biggest truths of the One Piece story. After Alabasta, many of the Straw Hat's toughest fights have not been against people who wielded some godly powers, but against the likes of a man who turned himself into a giraffe, and another who literally fought with cookies. So, what Crocodile said was actually right. Any devil fruit can become terrifying in the right hands. But this has never been more true than with the God's Knights. The God's Knights' devil fruits at a first glance seem very unimpressive, but this has not stopped them from turning them into powerful weapons. Even though it has only been a few chapters since their introduction, the God's Knights have already shown devil fruit mastery rarely seen in the story, where they're even better at using their powers than some of the strongest characters in the story. It could even be that the God's Knights are among the most skilled devil fruit users in all of One Piece, but even beyond this, their abilities might also belong to a special class of devil fruits we've only seen once before in the entire series. The Knight's mission on Elbaf is very simply to kidnap the country's children, but the way they've chosen to go about this has been by relying completely on their devil fruit powers. Gunko, Somers and Gillingham have literally set up their private picnic on the island, while they let their abilities do all their work for them, and this in itself is actually really impressive. Using devil fruits normally requires a lot of concentration, yet the Knights are having an actual feast while their powers wreak havoc across an entire country. This is actually another thing I should point out, which is that Elbaf is an absolutely enormous location, dwarfing most of the islands we've seen so far in this story. This means that the Knights are not just having lunch while using their fruits. They are using their powers at a range of potentially dozens of kilometers. Range has many times been noted to be one of the big limitations of devil fruit abilities, where even top-level characters struggle with using their powers at a distance. And the rule is that you pretty much always have to use your devil fruit close to your actual body. The best example of this is probably Trafalgar Law, where it used to literally take a toll on his lifespan to create rooms at a bigger range. Law actually needed to awaken his powers before he was able to create rooms that weren't in contact with his body, and he also notes that this took a big toll on his stamina. Yet here we have the God's Knights, chatting and dining while their abilities are being used across an entire country. The Knights are actually so unbothered by their current use of devil fruits that they even complain about how easy this mission is. Still, just because they are so casual about this, does not mean that their abilities are not actually strong. To prove this, I'll go over the impressive feats the God's Knights have already shown in this arc with just their fruits. When Sol tried to stop the kids from leaving, he was damaged by a torn barrier made by Saint Somers. Sol is a former Vice Admiral and a hockey user, and we've seen that he still got it even as a teacher. But this barrier did not only keep him at bay, it hurt Sol to a point where he fell to the ground screaming. Another thing that proves Somers' skill with his fruit is that he has also somehow been able to make this barrier invisible, which is something that should go beyond the basic limitations of a devil fruit based on thorns. As impressive as this feat from Somers is though, the God's Knight who completely breaks the limitations of their fruit is not actually him, but Gunko. Earlier in the arc, we were given a big demonstration of Gunko's skill with her arrow fruit, which proved that she's a bona fide devil fruit master. With just arrows, she's able to do all manner of things, like pinpoint the direction of her attacks, conjure unique weapons like boots and gauntlets, and even give herself the ability to fly. She is also able to manipulate her arrows without them being in contact with her body, which, as I brought up before, is normally a big limitation of devil fruit abilities. And the thing is, Gunko's powers aren't just versatile, but also incredibly strong. Gunko is actually the one who did most of the damage on Loki, and she only used her devil fruit powers when roughing him up. This damage was so severe that it was in the latest chapter revealed that it would take Loki several months to recover. This is actually something I should probably highlight. where we have certainly seen Devil Fruit users in the story do things the God's Knights have, such as using their abilities at a huge range or barely paying attention while their abilities are active. The big difference, however, is that many of these Devil Fruit powers were essentially gimmicks, and not that useful in combat. This is, however, clearly not the case with the God's Knights, where their powers are not only versatile, but actually also work on strong characters. This could well be because of the very thing Crocodile talked about all those years ago. The God's Knights have likely rigorously trained their basic Devil Fruits to become powerful weapons, but there's also another possible explanation behind their abilities. It could be that these are not in fact normal fruits, but instead, both Kunko and Summers could be users of special Paramecia class Devil Fruits. So far in One Piece, the only confirmed special Paramecia Devil Fruit user in the story is Charlotte Katakuri, and there's an interesting real-life backstory to his fruit being classified like this. When Katakuri's Mochi Devil Fruit was first introduced in the original Shonen Jump magazine chapter, it was said to actually be a Logia, but this was later changed to a special Paramecia when the chapter was later released in the volume. This was also seemingly the very thing that made Katakuri's fruit be special, where even though Mochi is not a natural element like the Logia, Katakuri was able to use his fruit as if it were a Logia type, where he was able to both mold his body into Mochi and create essentially anything he wanted out of the substance. Katakuri was apparently also able to break the basic rules of his fruit, where for example, he was able to ignite his Mochi fist and send it flying like a rocket. To this day, Katakuri remains one of the most versatile Devil Fruit users we've ever seen. While a lot of Paramecia users in the story are able to create objects with their fruits, changing your actual body in and out of your Devil Fruit substance is something we basically never see with anyone but the Logia users and Katakuri, or at least this was the case before Elbaf. Kunko is actually able to do this exact thing, where we see her actual body being able to shape into an arrow. Because arrows are clearly not a natural substance, this could well mean that just like Katakuri, Kunko is a special Paramecia user, potentially explaining why her fruit is so versatile and strong, with possible Logia attributes. And while we have not seen Summers turn his body into thorns yet, I'm open to the idea that he too could be a special Paramecia, and this is the reason why the God's Knights are able to do so many abnormal things with their on-the-surface basic fruits. However, here's something important to bring up. I do not think this explanation is actually even necessary. In reality, many Devil Fruits in the story are just very weird, where they grant the user powers far beyond the normal limits of the fruit. While Summer's thorns turning invisible is odd, so is something like the egg fruit literally allowing you to reincarnate, or the flower fruit turning you into a demon. Ultimately, the God's Knights don't have to be special Paramecia to explain any of their powers. What they do, however, need to be are experts at using their fruit powers. Once again proving Crocodile right even decades after Alabasta, any Devil Fruit can be strong if trained. I personally think this is actually one of the most fun aspects of One Piece, where it's a world where some of the strongest fighters have the most basic abilities, and how this just keeps on happening the longer the series goes on. The Grand Line began with the crew having to fight someone with the literal bomb Devil Fruit. It turns out he was in the grand scheme of things a complete weakling, and there for example exists a pirate further into the sea who's eaten the candy Devil Fruit, with a bounty 70 times bigger than his. An even funnier example is that Kaku with the giraffe fruit is somehow still a relevant character, and is to this day still able to fight with Zoro, even after Zoro has faced off against the Emperors of the Sea. The short and sweet of this is, don't overlook the God's Knights because of their basic Devil Fruits. They are very likely a genuine threat to the Straw Hats. The one God's Knight I haven't yet spoken about so far is Killing Gum, and he arguably has by far the weirdest Devil Fruit out of the lot, where it allows him to materialize dreams into reality, while at the same time transforming him into the mythical creature known as Killing. I did a lot of research on this, but for the life of me, I cannot find anything connecting Gilin from real-life mythology to dream powers, and this had even led me in prior videos to think that there was another explanation for these powers. Turns out, I was wrong, and I suppose I forgot that mythical Zoans have always been the weirdest devil fruit category after paramecia, where Sengoku's fruit for example allows him to create actual shockwaves, and let's not even talk about all the things Luffy is able to do. Killing Gum's fruit is however a lot more than just an illusion fruit, where the beings he's materialized out of dreams are actually able to move on their own and fight. The skeleton in this chapter takes down the Elbaf fire brigade with just one attack, and we also saw the snake in the last chapter not vanish after being punched. There's however clearly still some drawbacks to the materialization, where the salt killing gum got out of Summer's head wasn't the real thing and had 0 calories, possibly suggesting a future weakness to these monsters Killing Gum has created. What I however find super weird is that Killing Gum's fruit also allows him to make others fall asleep, which is clearly a different ability altogether from simply making dreams a reality, and once again seemingly has nothing to do with being a killing. Still, I think this is what I talked about earlier in this video, where devil fruits have now for a long time been able to break the basic limitations of their fruit, as long as you're a skilled enough user. I'd argue this has only escalated since Luffy's awakening, where especially in the final saga, imagination is a devil fruit user's greatest weapon. I just hope the story will still keep some checks on this, where I don't for example think it would be good for the story if someone like Aokichi suddenly was able to use fire powers, since it would ruin the uniqueness of each devil fruit. While this chapter was titled God's Knights and focused a lot on their powers, to me, the most interesting aspect was however us finally getting a glimpse at the truth behind what happened to King Harald, where Loki claims that he didn't kill Harald in cold blood. This led me to a line of thinking that it may actually be possible that Harald could still be alive in the current story. Now, by the time I'm writing this, I have finally gotten to read the original Japanese of the chapter, and I do think that Harald is dead and that Loki killed him. What Loki basically says in the original Japanese is that, does Hyryuden really think he'd kill their father without a reason? Where Loki doesn't emphasize murdering Harald, but doing it with killing intent. I think this heavily implies that Loki did kill Harald, but that the reasons were important, where he either realized something about his father, or maybe was forced to kill him against his will. An idea I had toyed with was that Harald, with the God's Knight's assistance, had possibly faked his death, which is for example why Saint Summers talked about them visiting his grave, and that Harald was to this day alive and well living in the Holy Land. Now, I more so think that Loki just killed him, but even if Harald is dead, I think it's all but confirmed at this point that he was secretly an ally of the Celestial Dragons. From what we've learned about Harald so far, all of his actions as the king of Elbaf seemingly benefited the world government, where he put the country on a path of pacifism, and most of Elbaf's strong warriors died during his reign, making Elbaf far more defenseless against a possible government invasion, like we've literally seen in the current story. If Harald was doing all of this intentionally, a big question is why? What would he have to gain in doing all of this? And really, the most simple answer I can come up with is that the world government offered him the same deal as Loki, a status of a celestial dragon and a life of luxury in the Holy Land. Loki is actually not even the first time we've seen the government do something like this in the story, where this was in fact the exact same deal they had offered York for betraying the other Vegapunks in the last arc. It's also possible that this was something Harald had been planning for years, where we see a flashback scene in this very chapter, where Harald ominously tells Loki and Hyryuden that he wants them to behave when he's gone. It could be that Harald here was not actually talking about him literally dying in the future, but that he was already planning to move to the Holy Land after he'd sold his country to the government. Still, while this could be true, Harald actually being alive is to me pretty unlikely, as the Japanese to me pretty much says that Loki did kill him, but for the right reasons. This flashback scene with Loki I think gave another big hint about ancient giant heritage being in fact the origin story behind Kaido, and why he believes himself to be an Oni. Kaido not only looks very much like Harald, he also has horns coming out of his head, which has now frequently been noted to be a sign of ancient giant blood. But if this wasn't enough, Loki as a kid wielded a club that looks exactly like the one Kaido and Oni from mythology use. I suppose at this point the only question is what Kaido's other race was, since even though he was big, Kaido still was smaller than the actual giants we've seen in the story. The most simple answer would probably be that he's just half human, since Kaido looks nothing like a fishman, a mink, or really almost any of the special One Piece races, and we know he grew up in a human kingdom. I think we can also cross off Buccaneer, since Kuma's Buccaneer plot was exactly the reason why Vegapunk wanted to base the Pacifista on him, and we know that Vegapunk already had Kaido's plot at this point in the timeline. Since no other options really make sense, I think Kaido was likely just half human, half giant, with his latter heritage being from ancient giants. I suppose there is also the idea that Kaido was literally related to Harald, and could have been a secret son he never revealed to the public. I'm not too sure about this one, since we know Kaido grew up on Vodka Kingdom on the Grand Line, and I have a hard time figuring out how he would have ended up there, from getting sired on Elbaf. Though I guess it's possible that Harald years ago went gallivanting across the world, and that's also possibly how he got affiliated with the Celestial Dragons. Loki and Haryuden's relationship as seen in this chapter is actually something very unique in One Piece, where Loki is the little brother, but seemingly is the one in charge, and Haryuden is in his shadow. In almost every case of characters who are brothers in One Piece, it is the opposite, where the big brother is pretty much always the dominant one. They're cooler, bigger, more handsome, and most importantly, always have the little brother in their shadow. There's just so many cases of this in One Piece, there's no point in listing all of them here. I think this honestly just makes Haryuden a more interesting character, where he not only had to live with being put down for his non-Elbaf blood, but he also had to grow up in Loki's shadow, which I'm sure isn't the norm for royal families, where the eldest is supposed to be the next king. I guess this could be part of the reason why Haryuden believes the possible lies about Loki, where a part of him probably just wants to believe them out of some childhood resentment. One more thing that this scene with Loki made fairly clear is that his blindfold isn't because of his devil fruit, but is simply something he's worn since he was a kid. We also already know Loki can actually see, since he was able to recognize that Shamrock looked exactly like Shanks in a prior chapter. One idea I have is that since Loki has been all about strength since he was a child, this blindfold isn't just a piece of clothing, but something he uses to train his observation haki. Back in Dressrosa, we saw with Fujitora that you can literally use observation haki to sense the environment even without your eyes, and we've also seen Luffy do this exact same thing. If Loki has spent literally decades covering his eyes, maybe he's actually a master of this type of haki, and he's actually even better at using it than someone like Fujitora, where he's able to literally see what people look like with just haki. It's just an idea, but I at least think it's cool, where you'd expect Loki to be some big dumb brute, but then it turns out that he's actually super perceptive. I think the big thing that's been hitting home with a lot of these Elbaf chapters is that, as expected, Oda is absolutely in love with this island as a setting, where we get far more details about Elbaf than we normally do with any country. When the Straw Hats normally visit a new nation, we usually get a fairly detailed look about things like their food, architecture, fighting styles, and so on. But Elbaf is going way deeper than this. On Elbaf, we get all of the things we've previously gotten, and more, where we see Elbaf schools, teachers, libraries, and now even their fire department. I personally think this, and how arguably slow-paced these chapters have been, is just more evidence that Elbaf will end up being one of the longest arcs in the series, where I feel like we're still just laying the blocks for the real meat of what this arc will be about. We're now almost 20 chapters into the arc, and by this point during Egghead, we'd already gotten things like Luffy vs Lucci and Law vs Blackbeard, and we're only 1 or 2 chapters away from Shanks vs Kid. I just in no way see Elbaf, an arc the story built up for over 1000 chapters, being an arc where it's about the crew just fighting the gods' knights, and I think something bigger is coming. But hey, maybe I'm just delusional. Ahoy matey, for thee have now reached the end of this video. It is time thee suffer a plundering. Here be the names of civilians who fallen to me blade. Mardiana Tanita, Thomas Johnson, Joshua Ann, and watching Higurashi at 12 gave me psychosis. So, thanks to all the members, and definitely consider joining if you want to support the channel. Sorry for the lack of uploads lately. The channel got recently hit by a copyright strike by good old Shueisha, but I'll try not to let that stop me from uploading more videos. I hope I didn't say this in my last video too, because then I would really start to sound like George Martin. Anyway, As always, thanks a lot for watching this video to the end.